At a cold, forgotten federal bus station, a once famous black chef now lives in solitude, quietly cooking free meals for the homeless. One night, he meets a 17-year-old girl holding her baby, fleeing an abusive marriage. Despite his own painful past, he takes them in. When her violent husband tracks her down, the chef steps in to protect them and is brutally beaten. What happens next will bring the abuser to justice and redemption to two broken souls. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. Late at night, in a forgotten corner of the city, the old federal bus terminal hummed quietly under flickering fluorescent lights. The floor tiles were stained from years of weather and footsteps. Vending machines blinked with half-broken displays, and the air smelled faintly of gasoline and old newspapers. Outside, wind rushed through the concrete arches, scattering trash and echoing with the occasional cough or shuffle of someone trying to sleep sitting upright on a metal bench. It wasn't a place anyone wanted to be, but for the ones who had nowhere else to go, it was shelter. Near the back, beside an old maintenance closet that had long been repurposed, a small patch of warmth existed. A steady stream of steam rose from a dented aluminum pot set atop a portable gas stove. The scent, rich, earthy, real food, cut through the chemical air like a memory from another life. And behind that pot stood a man few dared to look at twice. Most people just called him the Soup Man. Others used rougher names: the Black Cook, that old stray, the station janitor who thinks he's a chef. No one asked his real name, and frankly, no one cared. But Darius didn't flinch. He was a 55-year-old black man with deep walnut skin, a close-trimmed gray beard, and eyes that carried an ocean of silence. His body had the steady movements of someone who once operated in precise kitchens. And his hands, those hands, still moved with the grace of a trained chef, even if now they ladled soup into cracked styrofoam cups for men sleeping on cardboard. He wore a heavy brown coat over a stained button-down shirt, sleeves always rolled. A faded bandana was tied around his neck, not for style, but out of habit. A uniform once worn with pride had long been replaced by layers meant for survival. Every night at 9, like clockwork, he opened his little kitchen setup and began to cook. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He didn't ask questions. The regulars, mostly homeless veterans, addicts, women with swollen ankles and empty strollers, knew where to find him. One by one, they approached, heads down, murmuring a soft thank you or nothing at all. He'd nod quietly, serving them with two hands, like it still meant something. Because to him, it did. He remembered what it felt like to be seen. Years ago, people paid to eat his food, paid a lot. Called him Chef Darius. There were interviews, reviews, a white tablecloth restaurant near the harbor where his name was in gold letters on the door. Then, the accident. The silence. After the loss he never spoke about. Now, standing behind a shopping cart turned pantry, he fed the forgotten. And while the world passed him by, Darius watched. Observed every insult that slipped from the station guard's lips. Every sideways glance from young white travelers clutching their bags tighter when they walked past him. Every time someone called him boy, even though his knees ached from age. He stored it all like seasoning, bitter and dry, pressed deep into the marrow of his memory. But he didn't let it poison the broth. To them, he was invisible. But inside, Darius was still a chef, still a father, still a man who remembered what it meant to nourish, not just feed. And tonight, as the wind howled harder than usual and the benches filled quicker than normal, Darius stirred the pot slower, his gaze distant. Something in the air was different. He didn't know it yet, but this night would not end like the others. This night, someone would come. Someone who needed more than just soup. And he, though he'd forgotten how, would become more than just a cook again. The storm outside hadn't eased. It whipped around the corners of the bus terminal with a kind of reckless fury, rattling the old windows and whistling through the broken seal of the automatic doors. Darius had just finished serving a last bowl to a man with duct tape on his boots when he saw her, small, soaking wet, and barely more than a silhouette moving through the blur of rain and glass. She stepped inside hesitantly, cradling a baby wrapped in what looked like a bath towel. Her sneakers squished with every step, and the ends of her sleeves dripped puddles onto the terminal floor. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were locked downward, shoulders raised like she was trying to disappear into herself. Darius didn't say anything at first, just observed. She scanned the space like prey checking for danger, then drifted toward a corner bench near his cooking station. She sat slowly, carefully, like her body had learned not to trust furniture. The baby whimpered in her arms, weak and dry. After a moment, Darius reached for his last clean bowl. The soup was still warm. He ladled a generous portion and approached, moving slowly. When he got close, she flinched, not visibly, but enough for him to notice. He held the bowl out, gentle. "It's hot. You should eat." The girl looked up only briefly. Her face was pale under a layer of grit. Wet strands of blonde hair stuck to her cheeks, and her lips were chapped to the point of splitting. She didn't speak, but she took the bowl with both hands, her fingers trembling. Then a nod, barely noticeable. Darius set a bottle of water beside her and stepped back to give her space. She ate in small, shaky bites, one eye always watching her sleeping child, the other on the floor. She never looked at him again. Not that night. Not at first. He didn't press. He knew the difference between hunger and fear, the kind of fear that stayed in the bones, the kind you didn't talk about until you were warm, until the shadows stopped reaching for you. So he cleaned up in silence, folding his apron, checking the pot, rinsing utensils like it mattered. Occasionally he glanced over, just to be sure she was still breathing. After she finished the soup, she just sat there, arms wrapped around the baby, eyes vacant. Darius finally spoke again. "That corner over there is out of the draft," he said, pointing to a spot between two vending machines and a storage cart. "Not much, but it's dry. You and the baby can sleep there tonight if you need to." Still no words from her. Just another nod, this time slower. She stood carefully and carried the baby to the corner he'd mentioned. He brought her a folded wool blanket and a clean towel, laying them down without a word. Once she was settled, he walked back to his cart and turned off the small burner. But he didn't leave. He never left early. That was his unspoken rule. Minutes passed. The terminal emptied of its last late passengers, and the dull speaker overhead switched from bus announcements to static hums. The girl. She was still huddled in the corner, blanket over her legs, baby resting against her chest. She sat stiff, like she hadn't yet realized she was safe. Her eyes were wide open, staring straight ahead. Then, so quietly Darius almost missed it, he heard a sniffle. One hand came up to wipe her cheek, but it was too late. The dam had cracked. Her shoulders began to shake, small at first, then harder. She buried her face into the baby's towel and tried to muffle it, but the sound leaked out, soft, pained, exhausted. Darius didn't move. Didn't speak. He just watched. And listened. And let her cry. When she finally looked up, her eyes were glassy, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to end up here," she said, more to the air than to him. He stayed quiet. "I thought if I got far enough, maybe someone would help. Or maybe I'd disappear." She swallowed hard. "It's been 3 days since I ate. I kept trying to save the little food, for her." Her gaze dropped to the baby, whose cheeks were sunken, fingers curled tight against her chest. "But I'm dry now. There's no more milk." She wiped her nose on her sleeve, staring at the blanket like it held the next words. "Her father, he wasn't just angry. He hit me. A lot. Even when I was pregnant." She paused, eyes distant. "My dad said I had to marry him. Said it was time I acted like a woman, like I was some burden to hand off." She let out a bitter laugh, small and cracked. "I tried to come back after the first time he knocked me down the stairs. I was bruised up, crying, belly already big. My dad wouldn't even let me inside. Just looked at me and said, he paid. Go back and be a wife." Her breath hitched. "And when he died last month, I didn't even cry. Just packed a bag and ran." Darius felt something twist deep in his chest. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't try to comfort her with words, he had none to give. But inside, something cold and buried stirred, the shape of a memory he hadn't dared visit in years. His daughter's face. Smiling at 10. Angry at 15. Distant at 17. Gone too soon at 18. That was all before the grief consumed everything. Before the kitchen burned. And the silence settled in. Before he ran too. This girl, Emily, he guessed, didn't look like his daughter. Not in any exact way. But something about the eyes, the lostness, the fragile steel under the fear. It pulled at the same place in him that never fully healed. She leaned back slowly, her body curling around the baby like armor. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I just didn't want to die on the side of some highway. Darius stood, then walked back toward his cart. He took out an old hoodie, folded it, and brought it to her without ceremony. She looked up, startled. Pillow, he said simply, placing it beside her. She took it in both hands, eyes brimming again, but she said nothing. Darius turned away and resumed wiping down his station. And for a long time, neither of them said a word. But something had shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But the beginning of it. And as the wind died outside, and the lights dimmed inside the terminal, Emily pulled the blanket tighter, closed her eyes, and, for the first time in days, slept without fear. The terminal was quieter in the morning. Bathed in pale gray light filtering through the smeared windows, making everything look softer than it really was. The vending machines buzzed. The janitor whistled off-key as he swept past rows of empty benches. And somewhere overhead, an old ceiling fan clicked rhythmically, like it had been trying to die for years. Darius was already at his cart, stirring a small pot of grits. Not many people came through this early, but he cooked anyway. He always cooked in the corner near the vending machines. Emily stirred beneath the blanket. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking into the new day, unsure at first of where she was. But then she saw the baby, still sleeping against her chest, the makeshift pillow Darius had given her tucked beneath her head, and the scent of food in the air, and she remembered. She didn't speak as she sat up, didn't thank him or apologize for the tears. She just watched him for a moment, then shifted her baby carefully and stood. Her legs were unsteady, hunger and cold had carved away at her strength. You like grits? Darius asked without turning around. There was a pause before she answered, voice small. I think so. Never really had them. He ladled some into a foam bowl and placed it on the edge of his cart, motioning her over. Now's a good time to start. Emily approached with the baby cradled against her shoulder. She didn't sit this time. She ate standing, spoon by spoon, slower than before, like the act of chewing was part of waking up. I can help, she said eventually, licking her cracked lips. With cleanup or whatever you need. Darius gave her a glance, unreadable. You rest today. That's the job. But the next morning, and the morning after that, she helped anyway. She stacked the styrofoam cups, rinsed the pots with the little water they had, wiped down the counter. She didn't talk much, and Darius didn't ask for more than what she gave. Still, something between them settled into routine. Emily would wake, feed the baby if she could, then fold her blanket and start helping. She learned where the clean utensils were kept, how to stir the soup without letting it burn, how to portion out slices of bread fairly. In return, Darius gave her space and warmth. One afternoon, when the foot traffic had slowed and the pot was half empty, Emily sat beside him, arms wrapped around her knees, baby asleep in the sling across her chest. You were a chef, weren't you? She asked quietly, almost like she didn't mean for it to come out. Darius didn't answer right away. He stared into the steam rising from the soup, then nodded once. A long time ago. She hesitated. Like, a real chef? I had a restaurant, he said, voice flat. People came from other states. Wrote about it. Took pictures of their food before eating it. Emily tilted her head. What happened? He stirred the pot slowly, shoulders stiff. Life. Things fell apart. She didn't press. There was something about the way he said it that made her realize the story wasn't meant to be shared. Not yet. But it stayed with her, the image of this quiet man with burnt hands and tired eyes, once standing in a gleaming kitchen wearing a white coat with his name stitched over the heart. Later that evening, as they cleaned the station together, she asked if he'd teach her how to cook. Something simple. Something real. Not microwave meals or ramen, but something people ate around a table. Darius looked at her for a long moment. Then finally, he nodded. Tomorrow, he said. We'll start with cornbread. And they did. In the days that followed, Emily chopped onions with a plastic knife, stirred thick batter with a wooden spoon worn smooth from years of use, and listened as Darius gave short, gruff instructions. He never raised his voice. Never criticized. Only corrected, gently. Showing her how to hold the spoon, when to season, how to taste as she cooked. You trust your nose before the timer, he told her one morning. The clock doesn't know what good smells like. And Emily listened, absorbing it all like sunlight. She laughed more now. Quiet, uncertain laughs that surprised even her sometimes. She hummed as she cleaned. Sometimes she caught herself smiling down at Leia when the baby cooed softly in her arms. Darius didn't smile much, but something in his face had softened. His steps were slower. His voice steadier. Watching Emily with the child stirred something in him, not just grief, but something gentler beneath it. A warmth that used to live in his bones before everything turned to ash. He never said it aloud, but in quiet moments, when she leaned over the stove exactly like his daughter used to, or cradled the baby with one hand while stirring with the other, he felt it. Not a memory. Not a replacement. But a small echo of what he had lost. She reminded him of love. One night, while folding up the blankets, Emily paused. She turned toward him and spoke softly. Why do you do this? He looked up. The food? The people? Me? Her voice wavered. You don't owe any of us anything. Darius stared at her for a moment, then looked away. When you lose something that mattered, you either let it rot or you plant something new in its place. Emily didn't answer, but her eyes shimmered. Later that night, as Leia slept between them and the city outside groaned under a coming storm, Emily lay awake listening to the soft clatter of Darius cleaning his utensils, the slow scrape of metal and wood. She thought about the first time she'd stepped through that door, starving, scared, drenched. She thought about how he'd handed her food without asking her name. About how he never once touched her. Never looked at her like she was ruined. And in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in months, safe. She pulled the blanket up tighter around her baby and closed her eyes, not because she was tired, but because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to sleep. Darius, watching from across the room, lowered the flame on the burner and sat quietly in the dark. And though he didn't speak, his chest ached with something heavy and unfamiliar. Hope. He didn't know what would come next. But for tonight, this was enough. This warmth. This quiet. This borrowed piece of a life that might still be worth rebuilding. And somewhere in the shadows of his heart, he could almost hear his wife's voice again, whispering with a smile. This is the last gift, Darius. Don't let it go. The wind had shifted again, harsher now, sharp like broken glass swirling through alleyways. The terminal groaned under its own age, and the gray daylight outside did nothing to chase away the sense that something was closing in. Darius felt it first. A stiffness in his neck. The quiet way Emily folded the blankets that morning. Her hands moving slower than usual. Her eyes distant. Even when Leia cooed, she kept glancing toward the glass doors, like expecting someone. Or dreading someone. He didn't ask. She didn't speak. But something about the way she held her baby closer that day, how her shoulders stayed curled like a shield, made the air feel heavier. By late afternoon, the usual rhythm of their small routine had almost lulled Darius into ease again. Almost. Emily was slicing a loaf of donated bread into careful, even pieces, and Leah slept nearby in a carrier lined with towels. Darius was watching the pot, the scent of lentils filling the corner with something warm and safe. When he heard the shift. Not in sound, but in stillness. Emily froze. Her fingers tightened around the bread knife. And her entire body went rigid, like her bones had suddenly remembered something awful. Darius turned toward the entrance. A man had just stepped through the terminal doors, tall, broad, face unshaven, coat too clean for someone in this place. His eyes scanned the benches slowly, calculated. Then he spotted her. "Emily," he said, loud, like a command. She dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor and slid under the table. Her mouth parted, but no sound came out. She backed up one step, then another. Leela stirred in her sleep. The man approached, his gait heavy, boots striking the tile with certainty. He looked like someone used to getting his way. His face twisted into something that was supposed to be a smile, but never reached his eyes. "You really think you could hide from me?" he said, now only a few feet from her. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Emily shook her head slowly, trembling. "Please don't." Darius stepped forward, placing himself between them without saying a word. The man's expression shifted the second he noticed him. "This got nothing to do with you, old man," the man said, annoyance curling his lip. "I'm taking my wife and kid back. She's mine. She's not going anywhere." Darius replied calmly. The man blinked, almost surprised. Then he smirked. "What, you think you're her savior now? Some stray taking in other strays?" Darius didn't flinch. "She's not property. She stays." Something in the man's face twisted. "You don't tell me what to do. You're nobody. Just some washed-up black fool cooking soup in a train station." That's when the first punch came. Fast. Mean. Fueled by entitlement. It caught Darius off guard, striking him just above the cheekbone. The force knocked him back into the cart. A pot crashed to the floor, spilling broth in a hot puddle. Emily screamed. Leela started wailing, high and piercing. Darius staggered, catching himself on the edge of the cart. Blood pooled in his mouth, copper-tasting and warm. But he stood, slowly, deliberately. His knees ached and his vision pulsed, but he didn't fall. He didn't run. Because he had run once before, years ago. And it had cost him everything. Not this time. "You want to hit someone," he growled, breath ragged. "Fine. But I'm still standing." The man lunged again. Darius braced himself. But Emily moved. "No," she shouted, standing between them now, arms out like a wall. Her voice louder than he'd ever heard it. "Stop. You don't get to hurt him." The man paused mid-step, confused. Not by the resistance, but by the volume. The defiance. Emily's voice wasn't a whisper now. It wasn't begging or bargaining. "You don't own me," she screamed. "You don't own her. You don't get to break people. And then pretend it's love." His expression cracked. "Get out of the way," he said low. "Dangerous." Behind him, 2 officers had entered the terminal. One of them, mid-30s, white, stiff posture, was already moving toward the scene. The other, an older black officer with kind eyes, gestured for backup. "I said step away from the girl," the officer ordered firmly. The man turned, angry now, gesturing wildly. "She's my wife. This guy, he's harboring her. She stole my kid." Emily raised her chin. Her voice trembling, but strong. "I ran because you hit me. Because I thought I was going to die. And if I didn't get out, she would have grown up thinking that was normal." Silence. For a long moment. No one moved. Then the older officer stepped forward. "We'll need you to come with us," he said to the man. "There's a process for this." But right now, you're threatening people in a public space. The man looked around, realizing the weight had shifted. His bluster faded. This isn't over, he muttered. But he let them cuff him without a fight. As they led him away, Darius leaned against the cart, trying to steady his breath. His face throbbed. His ribs ached. Blood still dripped slowly from the corner of his mouth. Emily rushed to him, Leah pressed tight against her chest. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have warned you. I didn't think, I didn't want to believe he'd really come." Darius looked at her, then really looked. She wasn't a girl anymore. Not the terrified child who'd stumbled in from the rain. There was steel in her now. Not rage. Not vengeance. Just a steady, fierce line drawn in her soul. "You did right," he said, voice low, rasped from the hit. "You stood up." She lowered her eyes. "I was so scared." He nodded slowly. "You still did it." The EMTs arrived minutes later. Darius insisted he could walk, but they pressed him onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him out, Emily followed, baby clutched in her arms, her hand not letting go of his until the last possible second. The officers asked her questions. She answered clearly. Calmly. No stuttering. No apologies. And somewhere inside her, something opened. Not peace. Not yet. But a space where peace could grow. Later, in the dim hospital room, where machines beeped and the smell of antiseptic filled the air, Emily sat beside Darius's bed. He had a bruise blooming along his jaw, a few cracked ribs, and stitches near his eyebrow. "You should have let me go," she whispered. His eyes opened slowly, one hand reaching to rest over hers. "No," he said. "You needed to see you could fight back." She bit her lip, eyes glassy again. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Darius squeezed her fingers gently. "You already are." The monitor beeped steady beside them. Outside, the storm had finally passed. The wind quieted. The city exhaled. And Emily, for the first time, didn't feel like she was hiding anymore. She felt like someone who had just taken the first step of something long and hard, and absolutely necessary. She looked down at Leah, asleep in her arms. Then at Darius. Then at her reflection in the hospital glass. And for once, she didn't see a victim. She saw a mother. And a fighter. And maybe, just maybe, a daughter learning how to begin again. The courtroom held a silence heavier than any Emily had known. Not the silence of fear, but the silence before truth. Pale morning light slanted in through high windows, catching on the polished wood of the judge's bench and the thin golden strands of hair that framed Emily's face. She stood tall, despite the tremble in her fingers, with Leah bundled in her arms, asleep and unaware of the weight resting on her young mother's shoulders. The man across the room, her husband in name only, sat in a suit that no longer gave him power. He looked at her like he still owned the air she breathed. But Emily didn't flinch. Not today. When her name was called, she stepped forward with steady legs. Her voice was soft but firm, rising with every sentence. "My name is Emily Harper. I'm 17. And I'm here to ask this court to grant me full custody of my daughter, Leah. I'm here not as a victim, but as a mother, trying to protect her child." She paused, looking briefly at the judge, then at Leah. Her father used fear as discipline. He used pain as proof of love. I believed him once, because I had no one else. My own father sold me into that life. Told me to be a good wife. As if that was all I was born for. But the day I ran, I chose something else. I chose not to raise my daughter in silence. Not to let her think love means bruises and apologies. Emily's voice shook once. But she caught it before it fell. I'm still young. I know that. But I'm not lost anymore. I have a home now. I have a father now. A real one. A man who gave me shelter before he asked my name. Who gave me food without expecting anything back. A man who reminded me that I matter. The courtroom hushed. The judge listened. The opposing lawyer fumbled. But there was no denying what stood in front of them, a young mother transformed by strength she had to grow herself. By the end of it, the ruling was clear: full custody to Emily. No visitation. Her abuser was escorted out, not in rage, but in quiet defeat. Later, in the hallway, Darius waited. He wore a dark coat and a clean button-up shirt. The swelling around his eye had faded, but the scar above his brow remained, a mark of how far he'd go for the people he called his own. Emily walked to him, Leia safe in her arms, and didn't say a word at first. Just pressed her forehead to his chest. Darius wrapped one arm around her, the other gently patting the back of Leia's head. "You held your ground," he murmured. "You did it." She nodded, tears in her eyes, not from fear, but from relief. And something else, too. Belonging. In the weeks that followed, Darius did what he always did, moved forward, step by quiet step. He filed the guardianship papers without ceremony. When asked by the clerk, "Why now?" he simply said, "She's already my daughter." It wasn't an act of kindness. It was a fact. One he intended to make permanent. With the adoption finalized, he sat Emily down and asked her what she wanted most, not for Leia, but for herself. She hesitated, then said, "I want to go back to school. I want to learn. I want to become someone who can help others." Darius nodded. "Then let's do it, baby girl." He worked extra hours, picked up weekend shifts, and cut back on little comforts so she could enroll in GED prep classes. When Emily worried it was too much, he waved her off. "This isn't a debt. It's an investment." She studied hard. Graduated. Then took the next step, culinary school. She had a gift for flavor, instinctive and precise, but Darius made sure she earned it the hard way. "No shortcuts," he said, tapping her wrist lightly when she rushed the route. "Respect the process." While she trained, she still returned every weekend to the terminal, not to cook, not yet, but to serve, to clean, to hold hands with people who hadn't yet remembered they mattered. Leela grew up among pots and steam, learning to walk between crates of onions and stacks of bowls. The community began to recognize them, not as charity cases, but as something different. Familiar. A presence. A family. And in time, Emily returned, not just as a helper, but as a leader. After graduation, she turned down jobs in polished kitchens to come back to where it began. With help from Darius and a local nonprofit, she opened a small cafe not far from the terminal. A place where no one would be turned away. Where the coffee was hot, the bread was fresh, and the meals were offered freely to those who couldn't pay. They called it the last gift. She never explained the name to customers. But Darius knew. One evening, years later, the cafe glowed warm under amber lights, laughter rising from a long wooden table near the front. Outside, the streets were cold and wet again, the same kind of night Emily once wandered in with nothing but a baby and fear. A man appeared at the door, thin jacket, hollow cheeks, lost eyes. Emily spotted him instantly. She stepped out from behind the counter, tightened her apron, and approached him with a gentle voice. "Are you hungry, sir?" The man nodded, cautious. "Come on in. We've got some hot stew." She handed him a bowl, her own recipe, but based on Darius's notes, and motioned toward a seat in the back. As he sat down, she caught a glimpse of her father through the kitchen window, sitting on a stool, watching. He didn't say a word. Just raised his cup slightly. A quiet toast. Emily smiled, just for a moment. Leia, now older, was nearby, wiping down a table. She looked over at her mother and asked, "Mom, is he staying?" Emily nodded. "For a while. Just like you and I did back then." Then she turned back to the counter, tied her apron again, and served the next plate. Because the circle wasn't just complete. It was open. Always one more seat at the table. One more soul finding their way home. through something as simple as sacred as a hot meal on a quiet evening.